Joining us now from Westminster is the Business Minister, Labour's Pat McFadden. Mr McFadden, thank you very much for being with us.
Good evening.
This is an astonishing admission, isn't it? The Prime Minister's claimed to save the world, but now he's basically saying, but only after I help push it off the cliff.
I'm not sure there's as much of a difference between these two statements that you've just played as maybe you're portraying. The problem really did start in the USA, but that doesn't mean that every government around the world shouldn't look back and look at the regulatory debate that was taking place some years ago and see what lessons can be learned from that. And that seems to me, on the clip that's going to be broadcast later tonight, that's what the Prime Minister's saying.
No, I understand that, but we have to look at who was responsible for the mess we got into, and if Gordon Brown's policy played a significant part in that, that surely undermines his claims to be the only national British leader who can steer us back to prosperity. And, you know, the charge really is not just that he didn't really take an action against the banks, but really that he whipped on the kind of casino capitalism which resulted in the great bust at a time when he was telling us that there was no more boom or bust.
Well, in terms of who got us into this, it was actually irresponsible financial institutions that got us into this, and irresponsible decision making within those. But in terms of Gordon Brown's record, again, as he says on the clip that's going out later tonight, and as he said today, if you look back at the debates then, the city was arguing, the banks themselves were arguing for far less regulation, but so too were the Conservatives. So if you're going to base your decision on stewardship for the future on what people were saying then, you certainly wouldn't be holding Gordon up as the great villain of the piece.
Yeah, but I mean, that brings us back to there's nothing to choose between the two parties on what you consider to be your trump card. And you know, the point is that this is now confirming what we've heard from people who were at the IMF or at the European Union before the great bust, who were saying, well, we were saying this is getting a bit overheated, perhaps we ought to tamp down on this. And Gordon Brown was saying, don't you dare, this will threaten the city, this will threaten the Bank of England, i.e. getting it 180 degrees wrong with hindsight.
Well, there was something to choose between the parties then, as I say, because the Conservatives were arguing for less regulation than the government had in place. But do you accept that the European Union and the IMF were saying you should act, and Gordon Brown refused to do it? But what I'm saying is there was a difference then, because the opposition were arguing for less regulation, less control than we had in place. And there's certainly a difference to choose from in the parties in terms of economic stewardship for the future, which is the key issue at the heart of the election.
But there can't be if on this big problem, and remember Gordon Brown, as I say, was telling us that he'd sorted it, there was no more boom and bust, if actually he was following policies against advice which led to the bust.
Well, as I say, and as he said tonight, I don't think there was a huge amount of advice calling for more regulation at the time. The banks themselves and the financial institutions were calling for less regulation. The opposition was calling for less regulation. If that's your scorecard, then actually Gordon Brown was the person at the time who was calling for more regulation than either of those other two. What's important now is that we do learn from what's happened then, that we get the right regulation in place, not only in the UK, but internationally. And that's why he's been pursuing such a strong agenda of getting the global regulation right, the global system of policing what are international banks, after all, right for the future. And that's what we've got to do.
Mr McFadden, I've been looking at the Lib Dems plans today. One in particular sort of jumped out at me. It seems pretty embarrassing for you. I'm talking about the Royal Mail. You tried and failed miserably to privatise the Royal Mail. Your plans collapsed in a heap, yet here we are. The Lib Dems are saying it's a central plank of their manifesto. Well,
the yardstick of policy for us has never been what's in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. I mean, just to answer the specific point on Royal Mail, we always said we would keep it in the public sector, actually. That was on the bill that we introduced in the Lords, and that's what we say in our own manifesto published the other day. There are plenty of things that are in the Liberal Democrat manifesto that I wouldn't sort of say that I had to sign up to, or I'd be embarrassed. So again, I'm not sure I agree with your scorecard there.
But do you not agree that this is a good idea? The Lib Dems have a good idea. This is what you tried to do and failed.
Well, what we said was that we would keep the Royal Mail in the public sector, but that it needed more investment and more modernisation. I still think that's the case.
Mr McFadden, many thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, fascinating stuff there from Pat McFadden, and this is what you get at election time, Jeff, isn't it? The